Hello, Spark fans. Welcome back to Advancing Spark, where we're going to have a news day. We're going to look at the news in the Azure Databricks land from April and May 2024. So yes, I have returned from my various holidays and travels. However, it is very temporary because tomorrow I fly out to San Francisco for the Data and AI Summit, which is happening next week. And I'll make a separate little video about what to expect, what you can come and see. If you're there, come and see us. If you're not there, we'll be doing a watch party in London, so come along to that. Anyway. But that's another video. For today, we want to talk about everything that's happened in the Databricks platform in the past 2 months. And there's quite a lot going on. As always, if you're new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, Advancing Sparks brought to you by Advancing Analytics, your friendly neighborhood engineering and AI data consultancy. That's what we do. Cool. Right, let's go have a look at what we're looking at. So in April 2024, I've got the Azure platform release notes. Don't forget, there is one for Amazon, there is one for GCP. This is the Azure flavor of it. We'll have a step through this. We'll have a step through May. And then, yeah, just have a bit of a talk about what's going on in the world. Now, there's been a ton of news. Certain acquisitions of Tabular and Iceberg things going on. We'll talk about that after the Data and AI Summit, because I reckon there's going to be a fair bit of talking about those things anyway. There's also a huge load of things that are going to go GA, I'm sure, in the next week. As always, whenever there's a big summit, a big conference, we see a load of releases timed around that. So this is just getting the news up until now. And then as soon as I'm back from the summit, there's going to be a whole lot more stuff to talk about. So hold your horses on the newer stuff. We'll just catch up to date. That's the plan. That's what we want to do. Okay, so right at the bottom. So going way, way back, having a look at the stuff that's gone in since we last came and had a look at things. So yeah, a few bits and pieces. So DLT is getting better. We are overdue a DLT video just to have a look at what developing in Delta Live Tables is like in 2024, because it used to be build in one page, go away, go into workflows, give it a check, see if it works, didn't work, okay, go back, completely different screen, very disjointed, getting better and better. So we're going to have a little bit of a look at that as a separate video. It's now getting far better with using OAuth to do various things. The UI is getting better. There's some improvements around there. Private connectivity for serverless is now GA. That is a huge thing. So when you're looking at using serverless, essentially the VMs that get spun up in your server, they are no longer in your compute plane. They are now in the Databricks control compute plane in the same Azure region, but they're in different planes. They've got to connect to each other. So being able to set all those things up, being able to set a private link and ensure that the servers that get spun up inside of Databricks can securely talk to the storage that's inside of your own Azure tenant. Super important. That going GA is huge. So yeah, no, really, really good to see. Cloning's better. So I don't know if you've seen in the UI when you say, okay, I want to create a new cluster. Actually, I don't want to create a brand new cluster. Just clone that existing cluster. It'll now copy the libraries, or you can choose to copy without the libraries, which makes life a little bit easier. It's quite nice. Lakehouse Federation got a little bit better. If you had case-sensitive identifiers, it didn't work before, or it didn't really support it properly. It's now got better support for that stuff. It's better. Serverless compute, we're going to see coming into a load of things. Serverless compute for workflows is fairly big. If you're using Databricks workflows to orchestrate all of your different tasks, now instead of having to pick a specific cluster or design a job cluster, you can actually go, run on serverless. Just use serverless. And I'll do some fairly smart things to work out, well, what kind of serverless? It'll manage the runtime for you. There's a bunch of things in there just to actually make it fairly slick. And it's that kind of trajectory that we're seeing Databricks going, why don't you just let us do all the hard stuff? Just give all the levers and knobs, give that to us, and we'll just do the smart stuff behind the scenes. And you just click run, and it'll work. Which, you know, my poor dirty engineering heart goes, I like doing the fun levers and knobs, make it run fast stuff. But actually, if someone does that for me and someone does that for all my clients, then that makes my life a hell of a lot easier. So that's kind of the plan. That's where they seem to be heading. Okay, again, more things. So serving endpoints. If you've got a model and you're serving it through Databricks, and that needs to go and connect to other things outside of your feature serving model endpoints, you can now actually allow it to go and connect to other resources. So that's cool. Jobs created through queued by default. So if you're going to hit a concurrency limit rather than actually just saying no, you can't do it, you can put it into a queue. Better. You cannot anymore use workspace libraries. So it was a deprecation 2 years ago, and they're now going, yeah, no, it's been deprecated for a long time. You just can't do it anymore. We're just going to turn it off. So yeah, can't do that. Again, they put a good note. Storing libraries as workspace files, very, very different. So just be aware it's a slightly different thing if you're suddenly worried. If you're trying to do this, you should have changed away from this 18 months ago. Serving endpoints, another change. So again, this is when you've got a machine learning model, you're standing it up and you're serving it through Databricks. If you're trying to then give it to a developer to plug into their application, and they wanted to just like run something like Swagger on top of it to get back the UI specs so they can see the schema of the payload they're going to get back, you couldn't really get that. Now that's available. So now you can hit the endpoint, say, give me the schema, put it into something like Swagger, and it will actually just describe the API so you can understand what it wants, what the parameters are, and what the outputs are. Nice. Just integrate in a more professional, better way. Makes sense. Delta sharing now supports column mapping. Now, we saw Delta sharing get the ability to use deletion vectors. Column mapping is a very similar idea of saying there's essentially a more modern version of Delta that needs to be supported. It's one of those features you can turn on that will upgrade the table version of your Delta table so it wasn't previously compatible. Column mapping is essentially saying, well, we're going to keep the schema in the transaction log, and it might be different to the schema of the data that's in the Parquet files, and we'll just have a little bit of mapping going, well, actually, what we're going to present as this refers to this column. And that means you can have things like column names that aren't supported by Parquet, but you can just do it in the transaction log. So you can have funky column names with weird special characters that Parquet doesn't allow you to do, but you can do via this. You can drop a column without removing the data and then undrop it later. All that kind of stuff is what column mapping allows you to do, but you have to turn it on specifically, and it previously stopped you from using Delta sharing. That's now supported by Delta sharing. So, cool. System tables for billable usage is getting better. Great. Notebooks automatically detect if you're writing SQL. Now, it's a really useful feature, right? So if you've been inside a Python notebook and you're writing Python, you're like, well, let's just check what that looks like. And then a new cell, select star from, you run it, and he goes, that's not Python. What are you talking about? And you're like, I forgot to do percentage SQL at the top. This will just go, oh, this numpty's writing some SQL, and he's not marked as a SQL cell, and it will just automatically mark the cell as SQL for you. It's kind of assuming that people who write SQL aren't very good developers, which is kind of a Databricks mindset in terms of a lot of stuff that they built, but they're just trying to throw the doors open and make it super accessible. Anybody who can possibly write any bit of SQL can actually come in there and not be tripped over by things that you've been writing PySpark for a lot of times. You're like, well, that's obvious. So it's a good feature. It makes a lot of sense. It'll make life a lot easier for people. I just laugh. It's a little bit patronizing, but it's cool. It's fine. It's fine. Delta lineage now captures things of using column mask and row-level security, which is great. That should be part of your lineage story, right? So that's really good. Llama 3 is now available in model serving for Azure. So again, that is the big, hefty model coming from Meta. Again, it's just another one of the foundational models. So when you want to go and do some generative AI, you want to call an LLM, get it to do something, Llama 3 is now one of your options automatically inside of any Databricks workspace that has this enabled. All good. Minor change. If you're creating a model serving update, you just sit there and you wouldn't be able to cancel it. You can now cancel one that's pending creation. Cool. You can go and see the history of all the conversations you've had with the Databricks assistant, or you can turn it off. So you can go back to a previous thread and continue talking to it. Again, very similar to if you're using OpenAI and you can go to a previous chat and you've got that context in there. Similar idea to the assistant that's baked in across Databricks. Makes sense. And then we had kind of a surprise Databricks runtime. So Databricks runtime 15.1 is Databricks runtime 15.0. However, a breaking change was found in 15.0 to do with the pandas library. So essentially there was it came out, it realized it broke a load of stuff. They went, let's just make a new version and unbreak that stuff, but still have all the features in there. So they've downgraded pandas back to 1.5.3. So the runtime 15.1 is the same. It's still got all the things in there. It's still got things like the select where star. There, that's the stuff that's in here. So it's not new functionality per se. It's let's make sure we haven't broke a thing, put out a new release. So because of this, there's another thing that you'll actually see in the release notes that we've just, I think might even be in the June release notes, 15.0 is going to be out of support very soon. So the one that had the breaking change in there, the one that had the pandas library that wasn't compatible and caused errors, they say, well, we're not going to support that for a long time. You've got a month or so to stop using it and actually go to 15.1, which is otherwise identical. It just has a downgraded pandas library. So be aware of that. Big change if you hopped onto 15.0 as soon as it came out. But, you kind of should have tested things. Fair. All right. So that's April. Bunch of stuff in there. Some interesting stuff in there. Some nice things going GA. Lots of things to do with serverless functionality and security and all that kind of stuff. It's good to see. It's what we like. Okay. Other things. Moving into the May updates and going right back to the start of May. What can we actually see? So some improvements in terms of how it's actually talking to Spark Connect data frames and actually stuff how it does autocomplete. It's getting slightly smarter whenever you use Spark Connect, which makes sense. We've got Databricks Runtime 15.2, which we'll step onto at the end, because that's now gone GA, and we can have a look at what it actually looks like. Firewall support. So when you deploy a Databricks workspace, it always has the storage account that gets done in there, and that's what the DBFS, the Databricks file system, lives in. And you couldn't really firewall it because it didn't work. So it was always just this, don't put data in there. Never put your data in DBFS. It's a terrible idea anyway. Now, you can enable firewall support for that storage account that lives inside your that managed resource group, but also still just don't put data in there and don't do that. But if there's anything else that you're storing in your workspace, such as workspace libraries inside the file system, well then, yeah, you want to make sure they are secure so you can now firewall it up. That makes sense. New JDBC driver. So if you're trying to connect to Databricks via the JDBC driver, there's some changes in there that have gone in. Have a look through that. My old friends, our credential pass-through and table access control inside Hive are being deprecated. So this is again just that relentless march towards Unity Catalog for everything. Unity Catalog is turned on by default. It's installed in everything. If you're not using it yet, you need to start using Unity Catalog because there's so many features in there that are free, just part of Unity, that it's madness not to use Unity Catalog in this day and age for Databricks. This is another step towards that going, from the latest cluster versions, you can't do things the old way. Things like Active Directory pass-through, things like enabling access control on tables inside Hive, not inside Unity, they're going to be turned off. So if you want things to have any kind of security, you're going to have to start using Unity. So if you are not currently on Unity Catalog, you want to start a migration plan, feel free to talk to us if that's what you want to do. But yeah, that has to be on your roadmap. Vector search, getting slightly better. Some just maturity things were going into vector search. Again, that is that essentially embedded vector database inside Databricks on top of a Delta table. If you want to do it for things like retrieval augmented generation, if you're building out some kind of LLM app, that's now got IP access lists, it's got customer managed keys, it's just slightly better. You've got better logs, you've got better cost attribution, it's just better. You can go and see what Databricks previews you're currently signed up to. That's a nice new feature. Unity Catalog object tags for the actual objects, not the columns, has gotten bigger. So you used to have 250 characters, which is fairly tiny to be able to actually describe, if you said, this table, here's all the details for the table, this is the owner for the table, here's a link to the documentation. You can quite quickly get to the end of all of that. If you're trying to actually put full data dictionary specifications inside of there, you can now do 1,000 characters. And again, that's not for the object and all of its children, that's just per object. So for the schema, 1,000 characters, for the table, 1,000 characters, and then columns, just 255 each. Foundation model training is a new thing. So if you want to grab one of those foundation models, we had Llama 3, we've seen added as a new foundation model. You got the Mistral ones, you got DBRX, you got various different foundation models inside of Databricks. But if you want to go, well, I want to take that, but I want to retrain it, I want to fine tune it so it learns more context about my specific data, well, you can now do that inside of Databricks. So there's some new stuff that's come out around that to say, well, yeah, okay, take Mistral off the shelf and then retrain the end of it, fine tune the end of it with, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 million records of mine, give it some more context, And then when I answer questions, it just knows more about my own data, my own organization, my own context. But it comes at a cost. So whatever you're doing there, you know, that's kind of like the final belt and braces. I want this to be really, really good. Before you get to that point, you want to try just writing a better prompt, doing prompt engineering, using LangChain and prompt flow, that kind of stuff. You want to have tried retrieval augmented generation to give it that context at runtime. And then, if you want it to be massively secure, if you want to make sure it is very, very quick and always has the context, and you want to be very, very, very in control of the context of what it knows, then maybe you might do this fine-tuning. So it's not for every scenario, but the fact you can do it just inside of Databricks with your data coming from your own tables, very, very cool. Git folders. So we saw Git folders in a previous release. That's rather than using repos, you can now just in the folder structure of your workspace say, well, actually just link that to a repo, link that to a repo. And so you have these Git folders, which are essentially a Git repos injected into various parts of your workspace hierarchy. And they've improved the UI of it. So it's just a little bit nicer to work with, a little bit better. So you can actually just work with it a bit nicer. We'll also see in a moment, there's another change around that, and that's now GA. Those Git folders are now generally available. That is now going to be the way you are recommended to do source controlled information to move code around various different Databricks workspaces. Again, Llama 3 is supported in that foundation model training. Good. I mean, they could have just done that as the same release. It was a couple of days later, but yeah, it's fine. Databricks Assistant now starts auto-completing. So if previously you've been using GitHub and you've had Copilot in there, and you've been starting typing some code, and it goes, wait, you're starting to write the start of an API? Why don't shouldn't this be the rest of it? It's that kind of autocomplete, go in and actually sort of start preempting what you're trying to write and completing it for you. That's a feature you can turn on in public preview currently as you type, suggesting what you're going to try and be able to do. I've not had a play with it yet. That is definitely one on my list to see how good is it? How quick does it make us? How much is it autocomplete of what we're trying to type? Interesting. Vector search, I mentioned earlier, that is that thing of going off and looking up some embeddings so we can pass it into a retrieval augmented generation architecture. That is now GA inside Databricks. So if you want to use that in anger to actually serve out a model as part of an LLM application, you can now do that. You can now have pre-trained models in Unity Catalog. So if you've got a load of general models and you want to actually secure it and pass it to people and share to people, you can now do that as part of Unity and as part of Databricks Marketplace. So very, very cool. Just better ways of securing and sharing and making these models visible and just plugging it into the rest of your architecture. Very cool. Now this, I'm so happy. In Unity Catalog, if you want to associate an external storage location, that has previously been everyone in that same Unity Catalog metastore can see that external storage location. Now, it might be your given Databricks workspace can't connect to it because the firewalls don't work, but you'd still actually see it in your list of external storage connections. You can now say, well, this storage credentials and storage location is connected to that workspace. This is connected to that workspace, which makes a lot of sense for us because when we have dev, test, prod, etc., they live in the same Azure region. Therefore, they have to share the same Unity Catalog metastore, but we'll have a dev lake, I'll have a test lake, I'll have a prod lake, and they're different storage ones. Prod doesn't need access to the dev lake. Dev definitely doesn't need access to the prod lake. I can use this to just actually isolate connectivity to different external storage locations across my workspaces while still being in the same Unity Catalog metastore. So that is huge. That is a bit of a missing piece in terms of how we've been looking at things. Previously say, yeah, I mean, they can see the external location, but they can't query it. I'll just throw an error. It's just nice and tidy and just cleans things up. Better recommendation models. You'll start to see some new examples, basically some examples you can have some look at training for. There's a new Tableau connector for Delta sharing, which is super interesting. Because previously, Power BI has got an off-the-shelf one. Get data, go to Delta sharing, put in your details. Basically, Tableau has a similar one. Previously, you had to kind of go a bit of a workaround to actually get that data in there. And finally, 15.2 is GA. So we'll have a look at 15.2 in a second, but that's now generally available. And I said finally, it's not final yet. You got some new APIs. Now, I've not had a look at this, but in terms of being able to have a look at basically manage a lot of your settings for your different security settings within your workspaces, query them and see what kind of things has been set up. Enhanced security monitoring, basically security inside the workspaces, a load of new stuff with the API. I need to go and have a dig and look through because it sounds pretty cool. There's a new DBT connector, which is kind of using a newer version of the DBT architecture, which is cool. Not how to play with it. You can bulk select objects in the workspace. So you can click a lot of things and say, just move all of these things together. Click a lot of things, they delete all of these things. That's nice. Makes sense. Don't know why it wasn't there a long time ago, but you can now do that. The foreign catalog connectivity when you're using Snowflake, the federated queries allows you to use OAuth. Makes sense. There is a change you need to be aware of if you're using secure cluster connectivity. So there's some change settings that you need to be. So you got your outbound IP allow lists need to be actually configured to actually make sure that actually works properly. So if you have everything secured up, if you've got tidy things up and turned off all public access, you need to be having a look at this to make sure you are applying those allow lists so things will still work. If you have used federated queries, and so you've written a SQL query inside of Databricks, that's going against some kind of external data source, such as a SQL database or MySQL or PL/SQL or whatever it happens to be. Well, that's going to actually change your query and write a query that goes off and is actually executed on that external database. You can now see what was generated. So you can now see what the federated query actually was. It was always a thing that we did in Power BI. If you're going across a SQL database, you do all your nice Power Query stuff, and then you'd have to go to your SQL database and say, what queries get executed? Oh, that's written some weird SQL. Cool. You can now do the same thing. So if you're using Databricks, you're writing some SQL, that's firing it off against an external SQL source or any kind of database source you can do a federated query against. You can now go into your query profile and actually see this is the query that was generated and sent against that compute. Super useful. If you are providing data through Databricks Marketplace, you can now go and actually see how people are using it and do some usage monitoring. Nice, useful. I'm not quite sure about this one in terms of a while ago they switched from using Ganglia to do all of your Spark metrics, and this is your cluster utilization, and this is all the memory utilization, all that stuff, to using the compute metrics UI. So it's a new UI plugged into the clusters pane. Only worked if it's 13.3 or above in terms of the Databricks runtime. This now works on any Databricks runtime. I don't know if that's just like for really old runtimes and people will be complaining going, why doesn't it work for me? But you should be on a newer runtime anyway. But whatever. That's what that is. We've got runtime 15.3, so another new runtime is out. And as I mentioned, Databricks runtime 15.0 support finishing. Normally you get a 6-month window for each of these minor incremental changes. It's only the LTS versions, the long time support, you get a full 18 months. But this one is even shorter. So May 31 support ended. That is a final death knell going, no, this was a mistake. This is breaking changes. Don't use 15.0. It's not available in the UI anymore. You have to be using 15.1 if you were using it previously. Gone through. And finally, now if you used on serverless firewalls, you can now use other different type of compute. So you can basically change things around a little bit. Essentially, enabling more connectivity to actually be secure, which is good. That is what we like. Oh dear. So, ton of changes in there. Lots and lots of things we're seeing going through. We're very, very quickly having a look at 15.2 changes that came in there. So there's a few things. Some nice performance things. When we're saying resubmitted shouldn't be going in 20 times. They've stripped out the multiple versions of when you've got the adaptive query execution, the AQE. If it had various planned versions, they've just turned that off to save memory. You can turn it back on if you want to. Retrain queries is lowered. So it sounds like there's lots of things that are causing a bit of memory pressure in terms of lots of the newer, fancier optimization things to make your actual queries run faster. We're causing a bit of a driver overhead and a Spark UI overhead. So there's a lot of changes, which is just use less of the driver memory and make things go faster, which is cool. Describe history. Previously, it wouldn't show you the columns that you were liquid clustering on. So if you're doing things the traditional way and you had partition columns, you would see that in describe history. You wouldn't necessarily see that in if you're using liquid clustering. You'll now actually see that, which is good. Primary and foreign keys is now GA. So that's when you add a constraint, you can say, well, this is a foreign key constraint, a primary key constraint. And remember, that is what is used by Unity Catalog if it builds up that entity diagram for you. So super, super useful to use it, but now GA. Liquid clustering is now GA. Type widening is in public preview. This relates a little bit to that column mapping thing. So it's basically saying, well, actually, that was previously an int, make it a big int, but don't go back and change all of my previous Parquet files. Just any new data, treat it as a big int from then. It's that kind of upcasting a data type without going back and changing the data. To make things faster, doing it at a metadata level inside the Delta transaction log. This is a small one, but it's actually quite big. SQL merge. So if you're writing a PySpark statement to take a data frame and insert it into an existing Delta table, and you wanted that to apply schema evolution, it's got some extra columns, just evolve that destination table. Well, you've got a merge changes option inside our PySpark that you could enable. Whereas if you're doing that via a merge in SQL, you wouldn't be able to do it. There was a SQL config you would have to enable inside Spark saying enable auto merge, and that enabled it for the session. So you have to have like a little bit of Spark config to enable auto merge, and then you do just a merge statement. Yeah, a little bit random, a little bit complicated. Now you've got a new thing with your SQL merge. You can just go, well, with schema evolution, and it will now basically do the same thing. It will now use schema evolution, but you can now just express it in pure SQL as part of that statement. Makes so much more sense. You can now write custom data sources just in straight PySpark, which is interesting if you're trying to build, I don't know, kind of something very, very complex. I don't know. But yeah, something that wasn't available out of the box inside Databricks, and you want to build your own connector as a data source in Python or PySpark, you can now do that. Some more accessibility in terms of some of the pandas things, so applying pandas or mapping pandas, now available in Unity Catalog's shared access mode, wasn't previously. You can now go divutils widgets.get all. If you want to say, just give me all the widgets, I don't want to recurse through it and get those values, you can now do that. So if you're going to have a load of widgets that you want to pass into SQL, a load of widgets you want to do in various different things, get all is a new thing rather than having to pull back, get the first widget, get the second widget, get the third widget, etc. You can now vacuum specifically on a set of files. So you can say, well, here's the inventory files, go vacuum those things. Just a little bit more control, makes sense. And there's some new compression functions if you're trying to compress and decompress binary data, which is going to be interesting because we're seeing more and more use cases for binary, and we've got the new variable type coming in, which we're going to have a look at, but that's new. Yeah, loads of stuff in there. Now, 15.3 isn't GA yet, so we'll cover that with the next news along with whatever gets announced next week. But yeah, huge amount of things that's actually sort of gone on in the past 2 months. Now, that's not at all surprising. We expect that in the run-up to the Data AI Summit. All these things people have been working on, there's just a sudden ramp of going, yep, let's get this GA, let's get that out, let's get out all these changes. And I'm pretty sure next week is going to be insane in terms of the number of different features across Unity, across DLT, across streaming, across all of ML and AI. We're going to see a load of things coming next week anyway, which is going to be super exciting. Okay, I think that's enough for now. A lot of news, a lot of things happening in April and May. As always, I do recommend, I'll put the link to that document down in the description. I do recommend you take a look and run through it yourselves. Always makes sense. And then, yeah, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll catch you next time after Data AI Summit. Cheers.